I found myself increasingly isolated from others as I spent time caring for my parents-in-law. For me, the camellia hedge that my mother-in-law looked upon seemed like the bars of a prison. I wonder how many years those days continued. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that my entire 40s were consumed by caregiving. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law fell almost simultaneously and passed away in the hospital. Alongside the sense of loss, a slight feeling of relief began to spread within me. Then one day, a phone call shattered the long-awaited days of peace in our home.
Enough is enough. You're acting like a miser.
Who is this?
Hello. It's Heather. Heather. I'm your husband Robert's older sister. Long time no see. By the way, when are you coming to take care of me?
What on earth is she talking about?
I'm paying $15,000 in caregiving fees. Hurry up and come over.
I was bewildered by her torrential tone but desperately tried to understand the situation. It was unmistakably my sister-in-law Heather on the phone. Before I could say anything, she excitedly continued her tirade. As her anger gradually subsided, I cautiously voiced the question that had been on my mind from the start. Heather, Robert told me you passed away 3 years ago.
Huh?
My name is Amanda Brown. I'm an ordinary housewife living with my husband Robert. We live within walking distance of his parents' house, and in our younger days, we used to visit frequently. I only heard about my mother-in-law's dementia from him when her condition had significantly worsened. Part of it was because I was working, but despite living nearby, there was a long period when I avoided seeing my in-laws. In my 40s, I casually picked up a poster about rescuing cats I saw in town and decided, almost nonchalantly, to adopt a rescued cat. I ended up taking care of many cats in a room we weren't using, participating actively in adoption events and other activities. As I got busier with this, I drifted further apart from my in-laws. One day, Robert confessed to me, looking distressed, that his mother had dementia, and the next day, we hurried to his parents' house.
My parents asked me to keep Amanda unaware of the dementia diagnosis.
Why? Would they?
They didn't want to burden you. They knew you lived nearby, and they thought if you found out about dementia, you'd feel obligated to take care of them, right?
I felt a deep pang in my chest at the profound love my in-laws harbored. Even living so close by, I had no idea they were suffering from such serious illnesses. My husband and I don't have any children. It's not that we're concerned about not having children, but without kids, I couldn't find a reason to visit my in-laws' house. I think it was good when we were young. When we were young and had time, Robert and I would sit and have tea at my in-laws while admiring the camellias blooming in the garden. The meticulously pruned camellias served splendidly as a hedge and would burst into red flowers in the spring. My mother-in-law would gaze at the camellia hedge.
I preferred camellias. They're easier to maintain.
She smiled slightly with narrowed eyes. The house of my in-laws was always tidy, not a speck of dust in sight. She always dressed elegantly, sitting on the sofa and reading a book. Near the couch was a window, allowing soft sunlight to filter in. While sipping the tea my mother-in-law prepared, I stole glances at her profile. She was calm but seemed somewhat lonely, yet she appeared strong-willed. My mother-in-law, now suffering from dementia, seemed unchanged on the surface. But the once impeccably clean rooms were now messy, with garbage bags scattered everywhere. When Robert picked up trash from the floor, my mother-in-law bowed her head sadly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just can't seem to tidy up.
According to him, my father-in-law was also diagnosed with dementia. He would seclude himself in his study, reading the same old books for long periods.
I'm sorry. But my wife, she can't clean. It's becoming a hygiene issue. Amanda, could you help with the cleaning?
From that day on, my peaceful daily life changed completely, turning into a whirlwind of caregiving that began with cleaning and gradually extended to preparing meals and tending to their needs. Caregiving became overwhelmingly busy. Before I knew it, I had temporarily stopped my cat rescue activities and even stopped keeping cats at home. My mother-in-law always sat on the couch with a gentle smile.
Look, the camellias in the garden will bloom soon.
She smiled. She said the same thing, whether it was summer, fall, or winter. It seemed like my mother-in-law had forgotten my name, as she kept introducing herself to me repeatedly, perhaps thinking of me as a temporary helper or something. She continued to treat me somewhat distantly. The days of caregiving were indescribably difficult. When it became necessary to care for my mother-in-law and father-in-law, Robert contacted his sister, Heather.
We don't have any children, right? I was told that means I'm not fulfilling my duties as a husband. So, at least, Heather asked if you could help with caregiving.
Does he think I'm not hurt by such words? For me, consumed by caregiving and growing distant from others, the camellia hedge my mother-in-law looked at seemed like the bars of a prison. Yet, I didn't run away because I felt grateful for the kind-heartedness of my mother-in-law and father-in-law in the past. But still, caregiving was incredibly challenging. Those days continued for a long time. Before I knew it, I had turned 50 years old. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that my entire 40s were consumed by caregiving. Towards the end of winter, when the camellia flowers bloomed, my mother-in-law would gaze outside with a dreamy expression. Eventually, both my father-in-law and mother-in-law fell almost simultaneously and passed away in the hospital. Alongside the sense of loss, a slight feeling of relief began to spread within my heart. Sitting on the couch where my mother-in-law often sat, I let out a deep sigh, thinking I could finally rest. I suddenly remembered when I last spoke with my mother-in-law, staring into space.
Heather.
She quietly whispered. Despite having cared so much for my in-laws, I felt as though I had lost to my sister-in-law, whom I hadn't contacted in years. That's not true. I did my best, didn't I? Uttering these words to no one in particular. I gazed absent-mindedly at the camellia that had fallen in the garden. Since the end of caregiving for my in-laws, I began to notice changes in Robert's behavior. Recently, he has been using his credit card frequently. The monthly statements detailed his expenditures, and he had been dipping into our savings without permission. He often worked overtime and started going out alone on days off. Understanding his distress from losing both parents almost simultaneously, I tried not to intervene too much in his suspicious behavior. However, noticing frequent withdrawals from our account, I casually asked him during dinner. Recently, you've been withdrawing money a lot. What are you using it for?
Oh, it's nothing in particular. It's just that I've had to spend money on work-related social gatherings. I couldn't attend before because of my parents.
I silently stared at him for a while, feeling somewhat uneasy about his explanation. Misinterpreting my silence as anger, he nervously lowered his head.
I've caused trouble for you, Amanda. I'll try to cut back on work-related events. How about we go somewhere together on our day off?
He said this to me, but in the end, he never took me anywhere. After being freed from caregiving, I felt considerably idle. However, I didn't yet feel ready to resume my cat rescue activities. Discussions were underway to sell my in-laws' vacant house. When I visited the empty house, I would leave the windows open. Thinking I needed to water the camellias in the hedge, I used a hose attached to the faucet to water them. Despite the house being empty, I found myself watering the camellias daily. I wasn't sure if I did it out of habit or necessity. But knowing the camellias would wither without care, I couldn't stay away from this house. One day, our home phone rang. Assuming it was a sales call as usual, I picked up and said, "Hello," but immediately, I was met with shouting from the other end.
Enough already. You're acting like a miser.
Who is this?
Hello. It's Heather. Heather. I'm your husband Robert's sister. Long time no see. So, when are you coming to take care of me?
Huh? I pressed the receiver firmly against my ear, furrowing my brow.
I'm paying $1,500 in caregiving costs, aren't you? Hurry up and come over to my place.
Despite feeling perplexed by the barrage of anger from the other end, I desperately tried to understand the situation. The caller was undoubtedly my sister-in-law, Heather. Before I could interject, Heather, seemingly still agitated, continued her tirade. When her anger seemed to subside slightly, I cautiously voiced the question that had been on my mind from the beginning, trying not to provoke her any further. Heather. Roberti told me that you passed away 3 years ago.
What?
Her voice suddenly softened amid the chaotic phone conversation. The last time I had a face-to-face conversation with her was right after our marriage. At that time, due to work, she had moved overseas and eventually settled there permanently. Robert had informed me 3 years ago of her passing. The funeral was held abroad, and I heard that other relatives took care of all the details. As I recounted these events to her over the phone, she fell silent, clearly stunned. Heather, who had been overseas for a long time, couldn't believe that my in-laws had already passed away. We remained silent on the phone, and some time passed. Eventually, Heather cleared her throat, and with a sigh, she spoke, as if dispelling the heavy atmosphere.
You see, I returned to Japan 3 years ago. My parents opposed my move overseas until the end, so I couldn't bring myself to visit the family home.
But why didn't Robert inform you about my mother-in-law and father-in-law's passing?
I'm partly to blame for that. I didn't know they had dementia, and even if I did, I'm not sure if I could have cared for them. To be honest, I returned to Japan because my health deteriorated. I realized that Japan is where I find peace.
Since returning to Japan, her health has worsened further, and it seemed to affect her daily life. A few months ago, she mustered the courage to contact Robert after several years and initiated this conversation.
I had just injured my foot from slipping on stairs. I was probably feeling a bit weak myself. I just felt like hearing his voice.
After listening quietly to her story, he suggested, if it's that difficult, why not hire Amanda as a helper?
You and I have only met once at the wedding, right? So, I initially declined, but he insisted.
Initially agreeing to $800, I heard that the price was raised further because
Amanda wouldn't agree.
If that's the case.
Recently, he has been strangely using money.
That child has always lied to protect himself. Maybe he has some financial difficulties.
The price was further raised and eventually ballooned to $1,500. She felt uncomfortable asking her relatives to take care of me by paying $1,500 a month from now on, but she thought she had to meet me first. But when I didn't show up at her house anytime soon, she became numb and called me. Then you are saying that Robert just now cheated you out of $1,500?
That's what it means.
Recently, he has been unnaturally spending money.
He has always been a child who often lies to protect himself. Maybe there is some circumstance where he needs money.
She and I silently agreed that we couldn't trust him to be honest and decided to secretly investigate the money trail. Several days later. Since morning, I had told Robert, "Come home early." That's because today is our wedding anniversary. In the evening, while cleaning in front of the entrance, I watched the sinking sunset. He returned home earlier than usual, and we sat around a slightly more luxurious dinner table. He was delighted by roast beef laid out on the table, saying, "This is quite extravagant, but it was nothing special." It was just store-bought roast beef from the nearby supermarket arranged on a large plate. He happily enjoyed roast beef. After a while, the intercom rang. I stood up to answer the visitor and disappeared from the living room. When I returned to the living room, he noticed the woman standing behind me and dropped the sushi he was holding with his chopsticks onto the floor.
Heather.
Led by me, Heather appeared. Startled, he was speechless and stopped his hand holding the chopsticks, visibly flustered. She silently stared at him, and seeing them facing each other, I suggested from another room that she take a seat by preparing a chair.
First, explain why you told such an unlucky lie to Amanda about me being dead.
Her calm question was strangely chilling. He stammered and placed his chopsticks on the table.
Since our first meeting, it seemed like you and Amanda didn't get along, so I thought it would be better for both of you not to get involved.
Did he seriously think that the excuse of not getting along justified lying about his sister's death? Heather sighed deeply, holding her head with one hand.
I heard from a relative. You gathered money from all our relatives overseas to hold a funeral for me. Isn't that fraud?
According to a relative, he spread the news that she had passed away. Since it was difficult for people to attend a funeral overseas, it seems he deceived various relatives to collect a significant sum of money.
Robert once told me that Amanda seemed to dislike me for living abroad. But when I asked her about it, she said she never thought or said such a thing.
I have never spoken ill of her. I barely knew anything about her apart from meeting her once during the early days of our marriage, so there was no basis for me to speak negatively about her. Next, I asked him what happened to the $1,500 I received to take care of her, and he wore a guilty, pained expression.
I'm thinking of quitting my current job and starting my own business in the future. So, I wanted to save up funds for that.
I can't believe you. Do you seriously think that you can hurt her and still expect such lies to work?
I slammed documents I had prepared onto the table, and he visibly trembled. In front of him were reports from a private investigator.
What are these documents?
As he picked them up, his eyes widened. I had been investigating his actions for the past few days. The report revealed that he had a mistress and had given the money he deceived Heather to this mistress. Even more shocking, it seemed that money previously withdrawn from my bank account by him was also being used by this mistress. I cannot forgive you for causing trouble to my sister-in-law and relatives. Please divorce. The word divorce startled him. Looking at me standing there, he wore a pitiful expression, as if seeking sympathy, and apologized to me.
Wait, please don't mention divorce. You've been away from home due to caregiving for so long, haven't you? I'm a man, and... well, you understand, right?
I couldn't possibly understand that. Before I erupted in anger, he continued.
I'm sorry. I indeed have a mistress. But that's just a fling. I can't live without you.
A fling. Huh. Seems like you've been going out to various places quite a bit. Beside me, Heather took out a photo from the documents and examined it with interest. It was a picture of his mistress, dressed in flashy clothes and smiling. According to the private investigator, his mistress worked in the nightlife industry, and it seemed more like he had one-sided affection towards her rather than a mutual relationship.
Well, she just looks good because she's young. She's not smart, not considerate, and can't do any housework. I'll break up with such a vulgar woman soon.
He half smiled at me and finally apologized, saying, "I'm sorry." He awaited my response. The back of his head showed signs of thinning hair. As I gazed at his bald head for a while, the door of the adjacent room opened, and slow footsteps approached. I had told them to come in about 5 minutes after the doorbell rang. Right on time, the girlfriend who was waiting in the adjacent room arrived. "Robert, look up." Robert, with an expression that seemed genuinely apologetic, stood next to me and was speechless upon seeing the young woman. He didn't utter another word. I had asked the private investigator to look into the mistress and come to my house. According to the investigation, he had one-sided affection, but it was Heather who threatened.
If you don't cooperate with us, we'll sue for adultery.
She's a flashy woman in her early 30s, looking like she's about to burst into tears as she gazes at him. Before she came here, I had a brief private conversation with this mistress. He had told her,
I'm busy preparing for a startup, so please wait just a little longer.
I didn't know he was married, and I'm not serious about dating him.
The mistress, in a restless manner, offered excuses while fiddling with her shoulder-length hair. She suddenly learned that the man she was dating had a wife, so it's not surprising that she's being talked to through a private investigator. I will confront him with the fact that I've been having an affair with you. I want you to hear how he talks about you at that moment with your ears. This mistress was merely entertaining him as a customer at her establishment. I desperately tried to conceal the pain of knowing my husband was being deceived by another woman. I couldn't discern the true feelings of this woman upon hearing his earlier words. However, tears welled up from the emotionless eyes of the mistress. Could it be that she truly loved him? Even this woman, who fell for a deceitful man, might not be able to stand here now if she hadn't lied to herself. Robert, exposed for all his lies, could do nothing but sit on the floor in astonishment, his shoulders slumped heavily. The turmoil caused by one man's antics continued late into the night. After a long discussion, Roberti and I ended up divorcing. There were 3 people claiming compensation. Not only me and Heather, but the mistress also strongly asserted I was deceived and demanded compensation. Claiming compensation from 3 individuals was quite financially burdensome, and the payments were delayed. I started working as a helper, utilizing my experience caring for my in-laws, so I wasn't struggling financially. Thus, I wasn't too concerned about the delayed compensation, but the former mistress was different. Angered by the delay in payment, she reportedly called the company where he worked and demanded payment directly from him. As this occurred daily, it created a negative impression within the company. Despite being advised by the boss to handle the daily calls properly, he decided he couldn't do anything and quit his job. After that, I gradually stopped contacting him. Rumors suggest he is working tirelessly from morning till night in a distant town solely to pay off the compensation. Heather, on the other hand, started living back at her parents' house. She is capable of handling most household chores herself, but I assist her care as a helper several times a week. Robert used to say that Heather and I didn't get along well, but as we talked again like this, I realized we got along very well. I resumed volunteering for the protection of stray cats, which keeps me busy every day. When I told her that I have several rescued cats at home, she surprisingly showed interest.
Do you think I could have one?
I recommended the most gentle and intelligent black cat among the rescued ones. The clever cat quickly learned to use the litter box and didn't mess up the room, which she liked. I always reminded her to be careful when opening windows and doors, so the house windows are always closed. I visited her house after several days to assist with her daily care, and when I opened the window, a refreshing spring breeze entered the room. Camellia flowers, blooming beautifully again this year, were dropping their petals onto the ground. As she sat on the couch, she called out to me.
I want to thank you again. Thank you so much for taking care of my mother and father. I believe they were happy until the end.
I shook my head and chuckled in self-mockery. I shared that my father-in-law always read books in his studies, and my mother-in-law always treated me as a stranger, thinking of me as just another helper. Then, I told her that her mother whispered her name just before she passed away. Heather, closing her eyes as if contemplating this fact, faintly smiled at me.
I remember telling my mom a long time ago that we should cut down that hedge of camellias. There were bugs on them, and people say camellias are bad luck, you know.
A camellia flower falls with a gentle thud.
But my mom never, ever cut down those camellias. Why? I asked her.
She sits on the couch, gazing out the window. For a moment, I felt a glimpse of my mother-in-law in her posture. That refined, gentle, and somewhat lonely mother-in-law.
Because you said they were beautiful. You said the camellias blooming in the garden were beautiful.
Me.
Don't you remember? You mentioned it the first time she came to visit with Roberti.
As she said that, the memory came vividly back to me. In the early spring, I nervously stepped across the threshold of this house. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law were very kind, and I felt incredibly reassured. I glanced out the window and saw the camellias in bloom. They were so beautiful, and the words that unconsciously escaped me were beautiful. My mother-in-law had remembered those words all along, and she cherished those camellias dearly, with so much love. She smiled softly at me as I gazed out the window.
Actually, there was another, younger sister beneath Robert and me. She was lost to a miscarriage.
Ah. I've never heard this story before.
Roberti probably didn't know either. My parents rarely spoke of it.
Her mother had experienced a late-term miscarriage, and had the child survived, she would have been the same age as me. According to Heather, the camellias planted in the garden were planted the year her sister was lost. Understanding a bit more of her mother-in-law's somewhat lonely expression, I felt a tightness in my chest.
Perhaps my mother's last words included my name, but if she had just a few more seconds, even a moment longer, I think she would have said your name.
A kitten rubbed against my legs as if seeking affection. I lifted the kitten and brought my face close to its beautiful fur. Emotions too deep for words surged within me, and I instinctively buried my face in the kitten's fur. The cat's back was soft and warm, and against its slightly damp fur, I whispered, "I'm sorry." Another camellia flower blooming in the garden quietly fell to the ground. How did you find this story? Please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time in the next video.